Adam's Descendants, a primer, concerning the relationship of civilization, God's law, and the descendants of Adam, written by J. Kent Crutcher, finished in 1996, slightly updated 2024 with internet links. 1996 was before the internet, before the flood of information from the internet. As you listen to this book on the internet, it would be more informative for you if you would pull up the book on my webpage and read as you listen. Please go to crutchercpa.com, then click on the Books tab, then the Adam book. I put a link in the description narrative above. Introduction. The Bible states that we are being destroyed by a lack of knowledge. Hosea 4:6. Hopefully, this work will start you on a long road of discovery. To better understand this short book on the descendants of Adam and their relationship to civilization, it is necessary to explain a few points. At first glance, this may appear to be a book about religion. It is not. But what is equally true is that we cannot leave out the influence of God upon man. Modern Americans have been conditioned to separate God from our daily lives, leave him in the church. But it was not always that way. The concept of God's influence upon man will at first seem strange to some of you. It was for me, age 12 to 35 of my life, I was an atheist. But in a way, I am still an atheist to modern Christian theology. I just ask that you read the whole book before forming a final picture in your mind. Hopefully, you will see the required connection between God and man after some thought. Second, when visualizing the people of each civilization who are summarized in this text, remember the Texas Texan example. In 1900, when someone referred to one as a Texan, what would come to mind? It would be a person with light skin, often tall, refers to men 5'10" and above. Probably light eyes and ancestry, mostly from Northern Europe. In short, the 1900 Texan was white. They were 95% of the population. But what is more important? They were the children of the founders. Who were the geographic Texans in the year 1700? They were Indians. Who were the geographic Texans in 1820? They were Indians, 30,000, and 3 small settlements of Mexicans, 100 Spanish surnames in the whole of Texas, in census of 1828. Who were Texans in 1996? Some would say they are only the sons and daughters of the white founders. Others would say they are all races, American, African, Mexican, Asian, and a mixture thereof. What do you think the Texan of 2050 will be? The point is, Texan is a relative term. It depends on time and point of view. And just like any other geographic area, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, Greece, Rome, and so forth, the race of the inhabitants could, and usually did, change depending on the time frame in question. And 2, most people know that modern history books are Marxist. History books have an agenda. They often lie on racial issues. An additional factor, I have done about 10,000 hours of genealogy work, often reading original documents. Clearly, these often conflict with the textbook version of our history here in America. Textbooks lie. Third, when you review the drawings, sculptures, etc., look at the features of the people presented. Look at the face, specifically the nose, ears, lips, skull, eyes, etc. Try not to pay too much attention to the color of the rock that was sculptured. Next, realize that historical records are incomplete. We are working with a huge picture puzzle that has many pieces missing. Add to this the different interpretations by each historical author and a dishonest version by modern state propagandist historians, and it often becomes difficult to decipher history accurately. Also, recognize that each generation tends to bend history to fit their individual time. In addition, we are uncovering new historical records daily. All of these factors affect the accuracy of history. But for those willing to dig a little, many original untainted documents are still there, awaiting the curious mind. In this writing, with the puzzle pieces available to us, we have made an attempt to present the historical facts concerning Adamic man, Adam and his descendants, honestly. At times we were forced to decide if respected historians made errors, or if the record, as presented, was 100% logical. The decoding would have been harder without the generalized history of the Holy Bible to guide us. Secular and Bible history sort of match, given understanding. The journey was interesting, but often difficult. Consider that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, 3,500 years after Adam was created. I question the time of Noah's flood, and much of the genealogy dates. But there is a worldwide agreement. There was a flood. Thinking historians estimate 10,000 BC. The Bible dates it at 2300 BC. I also question if Adam came after the flood, not before. Perhaps you see the point I am trying to make. The exact dates of events, secular history dates could be wrong. It is just an estimate. Bible dates could be wrong. Moses wrote them down long after, 1,000s of years after they happened. Figuratively speaking, also to most of you, this book will be sort of like taking a trip to a place that you have wanted to see all your life. You have read a few brochures and talked to people who say they have been there. You have it set in your mind what it must be like, tainted by your public school education. Immediately after the first tour, Chapter 1, most of you will say that you were never told or have never read about the new things you see. You wonder if you accidentally took the wrong tour bus. Some of you will be excited and want to see more. Some will stomp off in a huff. Christ said in Luke 12:51, "Suppose you that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you, nay, but rather division." That is exactly what is happening in our world today. His script is coming to life. These are dynamic times in which we live. Finally, we have tried to present the historical facts outlined in this text as accurately and honestly as possible. These writings are not meant to offend anyone or any group of people. However, no doubt, the truth contained within will offend some, perhaps many, individuals. In each chapter, I have links to other videos relating to that chapter if you wish to click on them in the YouTube description part of this video. Chapter 1. Adamic Man. From modern science, we learn that man has been on this earth for some time. The amount of time depends on the evolutionary theorist. However, all historians agree. About 5,500 years ago, something happened in the history of man. Refinement of metals began. Copper, iron, gold, silver, etc. Irrigation systems were constructed. Great cities were built, and magnificent works of architecture emerged. Suddenly, man became more creative, intelligent, and constructive. What happened? One source for this answer lies in the oldest history book available, the Holy Bible. Structured, intelligent, order began. Most fundamentalist Christians claim all men originate from Adam. Tracing the genealogy of the Bible backward, Adam's birth took place about 5407 BC, 7,400 years ago. The Septuagint version, 6,000 years, the King James and New American Standard versions. These Bible fundamentalists ignore the scientific evidence about us that is in conflict with this assertion. But like the atheistic evolutionist, they claim that evolution did occur. That is to say, the races formed after the creation of Adam. Due to environmental factors, the skin colors changed. Skeletal and muscular structure became different. Skull shapes and brain size changed. Eye color changed, and so on. A closer examination of the Bible reveals evidence that proves this claim by the fundamentalist Christian wrong. Also, we bring further light to the fact that the missing links in evolutionary theory are indeed missing. To understand the following better, read chapter 1 and 2 within Genesis. Point 1. The chapters and verses in the Holy Bible were inserted over 1,000 years after the time of Christ by a priest, Stephen Langton, 1205. A.D. not directly inspired by the Holy Spirit, but he did a great service for mankind. He separated the chapters and verses as he was taught in his training. Prior to that, the Bible was a continuous narrative, very difficult from which to quote. Remember this in your analysis of the Bible. Point 2, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heaven and earth. When? We do not know. This verse probably should have been chapter 1 in and of itself. Point 3. In Hebrew, a day can mean an actual sunrise to sunset, and it can also mean a period of time. How long of a period we do not know. Each period could have been a different length too. Point 4, Genesis 1:24. And God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and beast of the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Apparently, God created differences, liked his invention, and commanded kind after kind. And he commanded the Israelites of the Bible to not interracial marriage, kind after kind. Point 5. Compare the order of the creation from Genesis 1:2 through Genesis 2:4 to Genesis 2:5 through to 25. In Genesis chapter 1, God first created light. Second phase, day 2, the waters. Third phase, earth, grass, the land. Fourth phase, the heavenly bodies. Fifth phase, water life and fowls in air. Sixth phase, beasts of the earth and man. And he commanded the man and woman creation to be fruitful and multiply. But in Genesis chapter 2, 5 to 25, the order was, first, plants and earth. Second, formed Adam to cultivate the soil. Third, the beast of the field and fowl of the air. Fourth, Eve, bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh. If the creation in chapter 1 and 2 are the same, how could this inconsistency be? Point 6. Compare Genesis 1:27 to 28 and Genesis 2:5 through 25. In chapter 1, God created man and woman at the same time and commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. But in chapter 2, God formed a man called Adam. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. He became a living soul. The living soul issue is very important to recognize and understand. Later, he took one of Adam's ribs and from it made Eve. Adam and Eve were not commanded to multiply. They did so only after committing sin, eating from the tree of knowledge, deciding good and evil for themselves, not from Bible commandments. Point 7. Genesis 1:29 states, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. But in Genesis 2:17, God states, But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. But Eve, then Adam, did eat from the symbolic tree, and started deciding good and evil from their viewpoint, not God Yahweh's. Point 8. Adam and Eve produced Cain and Abel. Cain murdered Abel. Thereafter God banished Cain and made him a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. In Genesis 4:14, Cain states, Everyone that findeth me shall slay me. Genesis 4:17 states, Cain knew his wife, and he builded a city. Questions. Who is the everyone who would slay Cain? Where did Cain get a wife? For whom did Cain build a city? Obviously, at that time, 7,000 years ago, there were other people in the world besides Adam, Eve, and Cain. Point 9. In Hebrew, the word Adam means to blush red in the face, or to have a rosy, ruddy complexion. What group of people possesses such a complexion, is able to blush? Also see the chapter on ancient Israel. The Bible tells us what some of them looked like. They looked like Adam. Point 10. Genesis 6:9 states that Noah was perfect in his generations. In Hebrew, generations mean seed line, Strong's Concordance. Noah was not perfect in that he had done nothing wrong. He liked to drink and get drunk. He was perfect in his genealogy from Adam and Eve. Therefore, if he was perfect in his lineage from Adam and Eve, an imperfection must exist, a non-Adamic lineage, a pre-Adamic people. Point 11. Deuteronomy 23. 2 states that a bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. In Hebrew, this word is mamzer, bastard, meaning the product of a racially mixed marriage, a mongrel, Strong's Concordance. In this particular case, it meant the product of a marriage between an Israelite and non-Israelite. As explained further in chapter 23 and other parts of the Bible, there are exceptions to this rule. God commanded the people of the Bible, a special line of Adamic man, the Israelites, not to mix their seed with those who were not kinsmen, spiritually and racially. Click on my picture. Go links to interracial marriage sermons. On YouTube, go to the description above. Point 12, Genesis 6:2, states that the sons of God married the daughters of men. The commandment of kind after kind was violated, Genesis 1:24. Hybridization occurred. Wickedness increased. From further study of the Bible, it becomes apparent that the sons of God are the descendants of Adam, and the daughters of men are pre-Adamic, those people created before Adam. Point 13. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, 1446 to 1406 BC. Where he got his records to do this, we do not know, unless God repeated all of it, verbatim, to him. That is 5,000 years of detailed records. If God did not do it, but Moses had an ancient written source, was it correct? I am guessing, but Moses had access to records back into Sumeria. See chapter below. Abraham was a prince from Sumeria, according to the book of Jasher. To summarize, we assert that God created the life around us in a different order. The time frame of that order we do not know. Concerning man, the evidence from the Bible is conclusive. There was man on earth before Adam. How long before Adam, we do not know. In the following chapters, we will examine the descendants of Adam. That brief analysis should reveal something about him and what his physical and mental characteristics were like. Chapter 2. The Sumerians. Before Adam, man existed not to cultivate the earth. Holy Bible, Farrar Fenton version, Genesis 2:5. Symbolically, this meant not only to develop the land for sustenance, but also to care for the earth and God's other creations. Or to put it another way, there was not a man genetically programmed to build, to create, to organize, and to bring order onto the creation. Adam lived from about 5407 BC to about 4477 BC. Septuagint version of the Bible. According to all modern secular historians, the Sumerians were the first people to develop a civilization. Generally, 3500 BC is the period most researchers place as the founding of this cultivation of the earth. Perhaps their most outstanding contribution was the development of cuneiform script, the earliest known system of writing. Their written evidence also indicates they had knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. The Sumerians also invented the plow and probably were the first to use wheeled vehicles, as well as being the first to use the arch in construction. The Sumerians were an agricultural people and discovered how to capture floodwater and later use it to irrigate in the dry season. The system was elaborate and quite a feat of engineering. It served to make vast areas of the desert bloom on the hot, dry Mesopotamian, Greek for between the rivers, plain. See picture. Each year, the lower plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, see picture, would flood as the rains from the higher regions would rush toward the Persian Gulf. The Sumerians created hundreds of miles of water traps, shallow lakes, along the higher regions of the plain. When the land flooded, these receptacles would serve as reservoirs for future irrigation purposes. Because of the engineering, the results were deposits of valuable silt on the farmed land during the flood season, and abundant water supplies during the dry, hot growing season. This invention of irrigation on a large scale enabled the Sumerians to trade their surplus crops for metals, for which there were excellent craftsmen and engravers, and other goods and services. Because of this vast irrigation system, the Sumerians were able to settle permanently in one place. They were the first people to build cities. They used dried clay or mud bricks for buildings. They invented the temple, which resulted in a terraced tower or ziggurat, no doubt the first of the many pyramids created by ancient civilized man. The government was primarily a number of independent city-states, like ancient Greece, a later nation of Adamic man. The Sumerian civilization continued until about 2300 BC. At that time, they were conquered by another Adamic race of people. They later regained independence. Sometime later, they were conquered again, and by 2000 BC, they finally ceased to exist as a separate people. Abraham of the Bible, a descendant of Adam, left Sumeria, his homeland, about 2000 BC. In the Bible, the name for Sumeria is the Chaldees. Abram was a prince there. This is documented in the book of Jasher, mentioned in the Bible. But that book was taken out of the Bible, somewhere in time. From the Bible, Sarah was exceedingly fair, and see picture below for what Abraham must have looked like. Who were the Sumerians, and where did they come from? The native residents of Sumeria were pre-Adamic men. They were shorter with dark hair and dark eyes. Most historians believe the creators of the Sumerian civilization to have come somewhere from the north. Waddell states them to be long-headed, Nordic Aryans, Indo-European. They were the longish-headed, broad-browed, and large-brained Nordic type, and they were obviously fair in complexion, as attested by the blue eyes and white shell inlaid with lapis lazuli stone inset in some of their statues, and also by the darkish color of much of their jewelry, and of fair hair, and their general term for their subject people was the black-headed, haired people. The kings and officials on state occasions usually wore the Gothic horned headdress of the ancient Britons and Anglo-Saxon, the book The Makers of Civilization by Waddell. Waddell also has an interesting study of the king list in the Eason Chronicle of the ancient Sumerians. The king list is exactly that, their official genealogical king's record. His deciphering work has tied the Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Indian kings to the same source. In the Sumerian language records, the first of the ancient kings was known by several names, some of which were Ad, Adar, Ada, Adamu, or Adam. One can do a search on these names within this site to see that it is so. The Makers of Civilization in Race and History by Waddell, 1929 pages, 3 onward. Waddell was the premier, early 20th century historian well known for his deciphering skills of ancient historical records. What happened to the Sumerian civilization? Why did it become weak and eventually cease to exist in its current location? Pendle, his book, Why Civilizations Self-Destruct, by Pendle, 1977, pages 135 to 136, states that there was no apparent reason. However, he suggests that they failed to maintain a strong gene pool of genetically superior leaders. They failed to recognize nature and its natural selection process. He also states that the economy turned socialistic under the direction of the priest, as the financial records show. I think, as with other past civilizations after Sumeria, the rulers had children with their slaves, and over time, those mixed people became more numerous than the founders. It is happening in Europe and America today. And read below, Egypt, Greece, Rome, ancient America, etc. In the next 1,500 years, Mesopotamia was conquered and reconquered by different people. Some of the conquerors were pure Adamites, some were a mixture. The Assyrian Empire arose along with the Babylonian. Their leaders were initially Adamites, then as time progressed, most of the people became mixed. King Hammurabi established a written code of rules by which to live. Adamic man had long used these laws in his world. They were genetically ingrained, i.e., a circumcised heart, Deuteronomy 36, so to speak. But this was the first time in history the laws had become written. Hammurabi lived about 300 years before Moses. The Code of Hammurabi and the Law of Moses were not identical, but had many similar points. One could argue that Moses stole this law from Hammurabi simply because he was born later. However, for the astute Bible student, it becomes apparent that God gave his laws to Adam, and Adam's descendants carried them throughout the ages. Scriptures for America has a 6-part series on the law that moderately discusses this particular issue. The Sumerians made advances in science. They made many accurate astronomical observations and performed many complex mathematical calculations. Man's world order began to override God's order, the original sin, deciding good and evil, right and wrong, from man's perspective, not God Yahweh's way. The influence of Adam's genealogy in Assyria and Babylonia grew weak with time, but it was still alive. In a selfish manner, Adamic man continued onward following his genetic programming. But in time, the greatness waned in Mesopotamia. The strong among him traveled further westward. Today, most of the people we see in southwestern Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia, and the remaining Middle East are the mixture of pre-Adamic man, the darker skin and eyes people, and Adamic man, the creators of the ancient Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian civilizations. However, there still exists a remnant of pure Adamic man living in these regions. They are easily noticed, surrounded by a dark skin and eyes, people. Chapter 3. The Egyptians. Perhaps the best-known aspects of the ancient Egyptian civilization are the pyramids and the Sphinx. Also, the ancient Egyptians were known for capturing the floodwaters of the Nile, thus establishing an elaborate system of irrigation along the Nile Valley of Upper Egypt. They invented a pictorial style of writing in which syllabary and then an alphabet gradually developed. They were also skilled in astronomy, this fact from An Outline for the History of the World by H.G. Wells, and must have been brilliant mathematicians, taken from Cap's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded. They, or perhaps the Sumerians, were also the first people to utilize the harder metal, bronze, 9 parts copper, 1 part tin, for tools and weapons. There is an interesting side note. The tomb that Jesus was placed in was owned by Joseph of Arimathea, the great uncle of Jesus. He was a wealthy tin merchant that had residences in England and Judea. At the time of Jesus, I have read elsewhere that he was perhaps the most wealthy man in the world. At the time of Jesus, the Bible said that Jesus was rich, but chose poverty for his people Israel. England was the highest nation of tin deposits in the world. Who were the Egyptians? The Bible confirms the founders of Egypt to be Adamic in several passages, and this is demonstrated clearly in Psalms 105:23. Israel also came into Egypt. Thus Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. Ham was a son of Noah. From secular records, it is apparent that Adamic man was the ruling class, taken from the Great Pyramid Decoded by Capt 1971. The Races of the Old Testament P87 by Sayce 1891, and The Makers of Civilization P470 by Waddell. They engineered the irrigation systems, established a form of government, monarchy, and set the order of things. These rulers made Egypt the center of ancient civilization for over 1,000 years. Genesis 10:6, New International Bible Version. The Hamites, the sons of Ham, were Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. King James and New American Standard Version. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Since the dawn of history, the land of Egypt has been occupied by 2 different races, the Races of the Old Testament, P87, by Sayce, 1891. The original inhabitants were pre-Adamic people. The most recent pre-Adamic man was short, had darker skin, black hair, and black or dark eyes. When Adamic man arrived in Egypt, pre-Adamic man became his subject. Adam man was too smart for them. This made the name of Egypt famous throughout the world. In the later dynasties, there were almost 30, in the course of time, however, the 2 races became completely amalgamated. The people of Egypt we see today are the product of North African pre-Adamic man, Sub-Sahara African man, the black imported as slaves, and Adamic man. Today, Egypt's primary economic strengths are tourism, the great monuments, sustenance agriculture, and billions of dollars each year in aid from the United States. According to Sayce, the original home of these conquering people was the divine land of Arabia Felix. They were long-skulled with fair skin. The artist of the pharaohs acknowledged that their countrymen belonged to the white race. While the skin of the men is painted red, sunburn, or red ochre applied to prevent sunburn, the skin of the women is a pale yellow or white. The women protected themselves from the sun. The men did not. Hence alone the difference in the color of their skin inside the monuments. Research the use of red ochre, used by the Egyptians and early pre-Columbus whites in America to protect their white skin from sunburn. And the pictures inside the monuments are from different time frames. Remember the Texan example. Flinders Petrie compares them, Egyptians, to the people of Pun. See picture. Nowhere else did the Egyptian find a population which resembled that of his country. The nearest in type were the Phoenicians of Kaft, who in general appearance remind us of the natives of Pun. But apart from the Phoenicians of Kaft, among the nations of the world known to the Egyptians, Pun alone contained a population which in outward form resembled that of Egypt. So according to Petrie, the Egyptians, the Puns, and the Phoenicians all resembled each other. From other evidence, what did the Phoenicians look like? In Capt's work, the Phoenicians were tall, light-skinned, red-headed, and blue-eyed, from Capt's missing links. The Phoenicians were Semites and were known for their trading and seafaring. They were also known for the alphabet they created. For further documented descriptions of the Phoenicians, read the remainder of this primer. They were in the early Americas, 4,500 years before Columbus. See Chapter 11 of this book. In 10:15-16, it speaks of Canaan, son of Ham, being the father of Sidon, a Phoenician port. The mummy of Ramses Thet, the oppressor of the Israelites, had red hair. The races of the Old Testament by Sayce. When we consider that Moses, an Israelite, was raised from birth as a ruling Egyptian, and no one knew the difference by sight, then the ruling Egyptians of that time and the Israelites must have been a closely related people. See chapter on Israel. The Bible states Moses was exceedingly fair. They were of the same DNA as modern Europeans. See link to a video above, proving modern Brits and the ancient kings of Egypt have a 75% DNA correlation. Waddell's book, The Makers of Civilization, states, the 37th Sumerian king and emperor, Guni or Saguni or Sargon the Great, extended his empire westwards to the Mediterranean and Egypt, where he and his father and grandfather before him were pre-dynastic pharaohs, as well as emperors at the same time in Mesopotamia, and introduced civilization, Indo-European civilization, into Egypt with the Sumerian language and writing, Sumerian pictograph hieroglyphs. His son, Menes, was identical with the emperor Manes Tusu of Mesopotamia and Minos of Crete, and founded the first dynasty of Egypt about 2704 BC. See Chapter 11 below, Ancient America. There are lots of Phoenician writings in ancient America, 3,000 years before Christ, 3000 BC. There is a copper mine with unique high-quality copper in what is now Michigan. That copper is found in ancient copper works in Egypt, Greece, and Rome. See video link above that, talks about a civilization before the Egyptian with advanced machinery, those who built the large works there in Egypt. Do a search on the YouTube page, China Pyramids. We are fortunate the Egyptians have left pictures of themselves. They were carved in stone or painted inside protected burial chambers within the pyramids. Chapter 4. The Greeks. From historical records, the first wave of Adamic man came into Greece about 3000 to 2700 BC. Like Sumeria and Egypt, prior to Adamic man, pre-Adamic man occupied the territory. As the Sumerians, the Greeks, Adamic man, were the first to establish an organized order, the Greeks, Adamic man, are also an important focal point in the history of mankind. Adamic man in Greece formed the basis of Western civilization. They were intelligent, adventuresome, vigorous, and strongly practical. Because of these qualities, they produced high art, literature, architecture, drama, and philosophic concepts that have yet to be surpassed. However, of utmost importance, the Greeks were a freedom-loving people. They established the concept of republican government, established freedom of speech and religion, and established a system of law defining the rights of man. They made major discoveries in astronomy, physics, mathematics, and medicine. The first experimental scientists were Greeks, and children of all ages enjoy the written works of Greek mythology. The Greeks had a belief in the balance of intellectual pursuits, as well as striving in physical attributes. The Greeks were also the founders of the Roman Republic, where, for a time, the development of all mankind continued along a positive path. Like the Sumerians, the Greeks formed city-states. Each city had its surrounding territory, and that landmass was independent. It was a highly decentralized form of government. The Greeks were united culturally, but not politically. This independence of mind caused much conflict between the states. Yet the system existed for well over 2,000 years. Ancient Greece probably produced more geniuses per capita than any other time in history. The Greeks were also great seafarers due to innumerable harbors, bays, and gulfs. Along with their cousins, the Phoenicians, they were masters of the sea. Minos, the legendary first king of Crete, was also the first pharaoh of Egypt. Menes formed the book The Makers of Civilization. Minos Menes could trace his ancestry back to Sargon, then back to the Sumerian civilization King List. According to Waddell, Minos' kingdom was about 2700 BC. Other sources state 2500 BC. These early founders of Greek civilization were Adamic man, but the greatest influx of Nordic invaders began about 1300 to 1400 BC, from the book Passing of the Great Race by Grant. As will be documented throughout this primer, we will see that these Nordic invaders were also Adamic man. As in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the early inhabitants of Greece, Crete, were pre-Adamic men. They were a shorter people with dark features, hair, eyes, and skin, and were called Pelasgians. Most historians speak of the Indo-European invasion from the north as a mass movement of people who came in several waves. Each time the large Nordic type, with light hair, skin, and blue or green eyes, came upon the scene. They came as conquerors and subjugated the population where they settled, whether it was pre-Adamic man, Adamic man, or a mix of these elements. These special people were called the Achaeans, Phrygians, Dorians, Spartans, Lacedaemonians, Aeolian, Ionian, Athenians, etc. Passing of the Great Race by Grant. Roberts, his book British History Traced from Egypt and Palestine, states that many of these invaders came from Egypt. Hecatoeus of Abdera, 6th century BC, quoted by Diodorus Siculus, 50 BC, her 27, 46, 55 said, "The most distinguished of the expelled foreigners from Egypt followed Danaus and Cadmus into Greece, but the greater number were led by Moses into Judea." These quotes come from Your Inheritance, the Best-Kept Secret in the World, states this was quoted from Herodotus, the father of history. It also states that Cadmus was the great-grandson of Chakol, 1 Kings 4:31 and 1 Chron 3:6, who was the great-grandson of Judah. This book is printed by Sacred Truth Ministries, P.O. Box 18, Mountain City, TN 37683. And further from Herodotus, the father of ancient history, these Phoenicians were the earliest of the Greeks. Herodotus, History, Book 1. In Aeschylus' Supplicants, 6th century BC, Danaus and his daughters are represented as a seed divine, exiles from Egypt, fleeing from their brother Aegyptus. Since they feared an unholy alliance, they appear to have passed through Syria and perhaps Sidon into Greece. And from Capt, his book, Missing Links from Assyrian Tablets, Diodorus gives us another version of the same story. Now the Egyptians say that also after these events, a great number of colonies were spread from Egypt all over the inhabited world. They say also that those who set forth with Danaus, likewise from Egypt, settled what is practically the oldest city in Greece, Argos. Capt indicates these migrations of Dan to be about 1550 BC. He also states there is ample reason to believe that the Trojans, Spartans, Dorians, Lacedaemonians, Achaeans, Minoans, Danaans, and the Palestinian tribe of Dan are all branches of the same central stem, branches united from the beginning by a common ancestor, Shem. From Josephus, taken from his writings, Josephus, Antiquities, Volumes 7, 4, 10, and 13, 5, 8. Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, a Greek people, to Onias, the high priest of Judea, sendeth greetings. It is found in writing that the Lacedaemonians and Judeans are brethren, and that they are of the stock of Abraham. Now therefore, since this has come to our knowledge, ye shall do well to write unto us of your prosperity. The Judean priest, Onias, did correspond back to Arius, the Lacedaemonian. It is clearly documented in secular history that the Lacedaemonians were a tall, blue-eyed, fair-hair-skinned people. And from an old American high school textbook, these nomads from the north were not the swarthy people of today's Greece, but a tall, muscular, blue-eyed race. From the book, The Ladder of History, a high school history book by Macmillan and Co., 1945, as stated in Your Inheritance book above. What happened to the Greek Adamic civilization? It happened several times in the history of ancient Greece. The conquering race would gradually intermarry with their subjects, Genesis 6:2, pre-Adamic man, and decline would occur. Then a new conquering people full of energy and vitality would appear and subjugate the racially mixed people. Each time, these invaders came from pure-blood Adamic man. They came from the frontier, the wilderness of the north. Their northern home was harsh, the weak died early. Only the strong of mind and body reproduced themselves. They were wild and barbaric, but they possessed the special Adamic seed. The frontier of America was like that. This continual infusion of Adamic blood kept Greece the center of the civilized world for over 2,000 years. But in time, all Greece became a mixture of pre-Adamic man and Adamic man. And as in all recorded history, when this occurs, the nation will fall from its greatness. There are 3 sermons on this YouTube site concerning interracial marriage, forbidden by God Yahweh, to the Israelites. Look at the Adamic Greek pictures and compare to the Egyptian. Within books and museums, we have much to review. The ruling Greek had the same facial features as the ruling Egyptian. They are the same race. But notice that the Greek's skull appears larger. He also appears more muscular. Could this be because the Nordic's environment was different? Was it because the Nordic diet was higher in protein, he was a hunter, and the Egyptian diet was more carbohydrate, he was a farmer of grains? Did the Nordic grow larger and stronger because of his harsh environment?